Welcome to Commander Center, episode 273, and today we're taking a look at the cards from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, specifically in the 99 and not as commanders. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
Max, how's it going, man?
Are you ready to roll for initiative, Dana? Because I am.
I am. This has kind of been a perfect set for this time of year for me. The flavor's been really fun to read about, but the power level's a little bit lower, I feel like, too, so there's not a crazy amount of cards I want to run in my deck. So it's a set that I've been able to enjoy very, casually without having to feel like I need to find slots for a bunch of cards I want to run. Which I could have used that little bit of a break right now from the work of improving my deck. So this was very welcome. I will say that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Obviously, I'm finally getting to Modern Horizons cards, so I'll get to this set eventually. But no, I agree. The power level seems more on par for a core set, while very genuinely roping in all this D&D lore and verbiage and the feel of Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm very happy from the aesthetic side of I get why this will pull D&D people, and I get why Magic people will try D&D. So this is awesome.
Exactly. So this was episode 2 of 3, I think, while Chris is on vacation. So we will we'll knock this out Chrisless, even though he's our kind of resident D&D person, and maybe we'll touch base with him when he's back and just see if he has any thoughts, even though we're doing kind of the base set review right now. I'm curious what he has to say, because this is very much up his alley. Anything fun happen with you this week, Max, worth going into? Any cool games?
Well, first, we got a lot of cool games, and we had a bunch of listeners drive over to Eau Claire for the 4th of July holiday weekend. So we had Brian drive over from the Colorado area, Paul came over from the Ohio area, and then Matt came up from southern Wisconsin. So it was great to meet Brian and Paul for the first time.
Yes.
That wasn't through a computer web EDH game or just a little video screen in the bottom of a spell table corner. And just hang out and talk the talk and play a lot of really fun games. It was a great couple days with them, so it was nice to see him. Great to get some games in. Me and Brian had our Enchantress off on Tuesday night right after you left, Dana, when I subbed in for you. And Tuvasa reigned supreme over
nice.
Kythus, the green-white legendary, mainly because me and Brian made a secret pact to be Enchantress buddies, so we protect each other for the first 5 turns of the game, and then Brian on turn 6 drew 18 cards. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to win the game now, and I proceeded to win the game.
Very cool. Yeah, and I played a few games with them Monday and Tuesday as well. That was a lot of fun. That was really cool to see them. I'm on board with you there entirely too. That was very fun. We had a nice lunch, got to hang out, play a couple cool days of Commander. And I will also mention I got to play a game on stream last night with John Dunning and Jason Alt, kind of a movie-based thing. John and Jason do a movie-based podcast called Cult of Films that I've been on once or twice. And so we played a game last night where we built decks that were kind of themed on David Lynch movies. And at one point, Jason was playing a Clue treasure food token-based deck, and he had a gazillion things out, and he had put down, what's the enchantment that if you have 8 or more of the same name
mechanized
artifact?
Production.
There we go. He had a mechanized production on one of them, I think his food tokens, and had to pass a turn to, or did it, and then has to come back to his upkeep to win. And neither John or the other John that was playing could get there, so it came back to me, and I had to cast a Harmonize to try to draw down to hit a way to deal with the mechanized production, and hit both a Reclamation Sage and a Deglamor. So I had 2 answers for it.
Okay.
But he had a gazillion mana and was able to use those clues in the deck to tutor up a counterspell and a Mystic Snake, I believe. So despite me miraculously pulling 2 answers to his mechanized production, it was not enough. So he got the mechanized production win off, I think, food tokens.
That's awesome. That's a fun way to win in a deck that could be very, very broken.
And it took a spin around the table, and everyone had a chance to respond, and I was able to dig down, and yeah, that doesn't feel bad at all when you lose at that point in the game to something like that, when you can actually respond, and they just have more gas in you. So if you out there in listener land have played any fun games or made any cool trips to play Commander games lately, how would you go about letting us know about that, Max?
You can hit us up on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can head over to Facebook, search us CMDR Central, and, Google search us CMDR Central, and you can probably find a way to find one of us, if not all 3 of us.
You can also find us on Patreon.com.
Yeah, head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central. Check out our reward tiers such as the Decks You Play shows, guesting on the show, or just joining our community to chat with everybody and play virtual EDH with someone like Brian, Paul, Matt, or Dana and I.
Yes, indeed. And speaking of decks you play, I think we're going to knock out 3 more of those this month, so we should have a few Thursday shows coming up in the fairly near future.
Heck yeah.
So Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Let's just kind of dive into this, because this is like almost 400 different cards, particularly when you count alt art. But I mean, this is a relatively big set with a lot of stuff in it. It is a little powered down, I think, so there's not, quite the usual density of cards that are going in decks. I had some sets, Strixhaven and Modern Horizons, even where I was putting like 2 or 3 cards in a bunch of decks. And in this case, I'm looking at, I don't think any deck was getting 2, and a bunch of my decks got none. But there's still a bunch of interesting things that are worth talking about here. So we're just going to go through the colors in Wooburg order and talk about things that jump out at us that we think are worth mentioning. And the first one I'm going to talk about is in white, the Book of Exalted Deeds. It's white for legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained 3 or more life this turn, you make a 3/3 white angel token with flying. And you can spend 3 and tap it and sack it. And you put an enlightened counter on target angel, and it has, you can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game. And this is only activatable as a sorcery. So first of all, it has kind of that angelic accord effect where when you gain life, you make a flying angel. It's a 3/3, not a 4/4, but still. So, this is probably an attractive commander. First of all, a lot of angel tribal decks just gain life. That's what they do. Max's Dromoka deck has it baked right into the commander. I think this is a pretty solid card in some of those decks. But where I think it gets interesting, too, is if you are going to run it, then you have a few options like throwing something like Mutavault into your deck, where you can turn Mutavault into a creature to put the counter on Mutavault. Now let it turn back into a land, but it still has the counter on it. So now you have a much more difficult to remove than a 3/3 angel creature in play that's going to make it so you can't lose a game. So I think the question is, first of all, you look at this and say, okay, my deck supports it. I'm going to be gaining life frequently enough that it's worth, because 3 mana is a pretty low overhead cost, although it is trip white. But if you're playing a 2-color deck that gains life really frequently, that's not a bad price to pay to just, for no cost, make 3/3 angels. And then you have to ask yourself, do I want to put those couple of lands that are every creature type into the deck just so I can get extra utility out of that sacrifice ability and make it that much harder to use? And I think it's probably worth it in that case. If it's worth running the card, it's probably worth putting those lands in just to kind of abuse that.
Yeah, I really like this artifact. The triple white is maybe a little trepidatious when looking at more than a 2-color deck. I really want to know how WotC landed on 3 for the number of life gain, because that's kind of been the theme for the past few sets is 3 or more life, the thing does something. So I kind of would like to know the idea behind why 3, not any, why not 4, that type of thing. I'm not a fan that you have to exile the book. Like, you can't reuse this in EDH, in standard or modern if this is ran. You have 4 ofs, but whatever. So, I never thought about the Mutavault or the land thing. That's super, really cool tech, and does that mean I should spec on Mutavaults now, Dana? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, could be. So, Max, what do you like here for white cards?
The first one I really like is Moon-Blessed Cleric. This is a 3/2 for 2 and a white. It's a human elf cleric, and it has a keyword called Divine Intervention. And it says, when Moon-Blessed Cleric enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, and shuffle, then put that card on top. So you're getting an Enlightened Tutor, only for enchantments. So maybe like an Idyllic Tutor, but it goes to the top of your library. On a body. A 3/2 body is nothing to scoff at. I mean, you can get your use out of it, chump block, it dies, and you might have a way to bring it back. So you can kind of recur it if you have some graveyard synergy. I do like that a lot of these, there's a set of enchantments that are called the class enchantments that we'll probably talk about a few of them today. This is a great way to get these really cheap mana value enchantments to the top of your deck to benefit from their abilities, as well as maybe putting it in your Enchantress deck and going and getting that Ancestral Mask or your Steal the Godhead just to punch your commander through, or even in like other non-enchantment based decks, Doubling Season, this will go get it. The fact that it doesn't say aura really makes this card extremely useful in pretty much any deck that runs white. Yeah,
I agree. It's one of those things like some people just want to run every enchantment. Particularly if you're a combo player, this is just one more way for you to go get whatever, assuming your combo cares about enchantments, one more way to go get that enchantment that you need for a combo. And it's blinkable, really useful as well.
Yep. Before we move on, I would like to mention, how do you feel about them using what I'm assuming are D&D abilities, Divine Intervention, Flurry of Blows, as keywords on cards?
I'm torn. I think it's a little confusing for new players, but I also think it's very flavorful. So like I appreciate the fact that almost everything has a weird keyword, and there are keywords that are probably, although we could, I guess, see some of them again technically, but like basically they've just, whatever text is on the card has been given kind of a keyword or a descriptor. I think it might be a little bit confusing because then they also have to figure out, well, what's the difference between, Divine Intervention on Moonblessed Cleric and Vigilance on Nadar Selfless Paladin. Why is one italicized and one isn't? I can see how if you are brand new to the Commander game, it might be a little bit weird, but I do think it's also, like I said, very flavorful and cool. So I am torn. I like it, and I think it's a little bit, it also makes the cards very crowded. But, I mean, maybe that's not a big deal.
Yeah, I guess my standpoint is I get they're doing it for flavor-wise. This is supposed to read like a spell in a D&D handbook. At the same time, we're never going to see, unless, I'm sure we'll get another D&D set 5 years from now, but we're never going to see Divine Intervention, the ability on another card in Innistrad or the next core set or wherever. It's so specifically tied to this type of set. That's what I'm not a big fan of. I get why they're doing it. Like you said, it's all about the lore, makes it you feel like you're playing D&D, but it's so narrow that how do you do something like this again?
The next one I'm going to bring up here, you mentioned the class cards. I'm just going to go straight to Paladin class. It is a one, in what the classes are basically is they're a combination of these sagas where they're enchantments that have steps on them, but unlike the sagas where you just automatically move to the next chapter on the saga when you draw a card during your draw step, on these, they're like the level up creatures from back in the original Zendikar block, where if you spend X amount of mana, you move to the next level. And unlike the sagas, you still get access to the thing from the previous level. So in the case of Paladin class, it costs 1 white, and the first level that you're automatically at, spells your opponents cast during your turn cost 1 more to cast. So for 1 mana, you're automatically taxing everyone on your turn by 1 to make them have to, spend extra mana to do a thing on your turn. That's fairly useful, particularly for 1 white mana. Level 2, 2 and white creatures you control get +1/+1. So at that point, you have devoted 4 mana to it, and you're taxing people on your turn, and you have an anthem. Still pretty decent. And then for 4 and a white for level 3, whenever you attack until end of turn, target attacking creature gets +1/+1 for each other attacking creature and gains double strike. In the right deck, if you have some kind of a go wide deck, and I'll use my Adriana Captain of the Guard deck, for example, running a ton of 1/1s, and Adriana's a 4/4. There's going to be situations where I'm attacking with like 6 or 8 creatures or something, and Adriana is going to go from a 4/4 to a 7/7 just because of the melee ability. She's going to get another like +7 or 8 because of the trigger off Paladin class for each attacking creature. So she'll go up to like a 15 or 16 or something, with double strike on top of it. So in a go wide white deck where you tend to maybe have on occasion 1 or 2 bigger creatures, this is really strong on that 3rd level, and the levels on the way there are pretty decent too.
Yeah, all these class cards are great. I definitely have my favorites, Paladin class being one of them. Mm-hmm. We kind of moved over the Cleric class. That one is all about gaining life. But I love the fact that all of these are so efficiently costed mana-wise just to cast. Yes. Most of them are 1 or 2 mana, so they're great for that early game Magical Christmas land hand, or still coming down late game. You can drop it and level it up right away, and you're on your way to winning the game.
Yep, I'm a fan of these, and I have at least 1 or 2 more I'm going to mention when we get to those perfect colors, but is there anything else in white that you think is interesting?
That isn't legendary?
Yes.
Not really. So many people have already talked about the Guardian of Faith, the creature that phases out all your other creatures.
Yep.
So I don't know what much else can be said there. I'm a huge fan of plate armor. This is the 2 and a white for an equipment artifact. Equipped creature gets +3/+3 and has Ward 1, which means any spell that targets it from an opponent costs 1 more to cast. Or it's countered unless they pay 1. I apologize. And it has an equip 3, but it also says that the equip cost is 1 less for every other equipment you control. So a Voltron deck, this is going to equip for free most of the time.
Yeah.
Give a little bit of some hexproof.
It's just a free +3/+3 and a ward on your creature, basically.
Right. So, that's super cool. I'm kind of debating running it in Dromoka just because 3 power is 1 less swing with Dromoka, and it's giving it somewhat of a pseudo hexproof ability.
No, yeah, that's useful. The last white one I kind of like is Teleportation Circle. 3 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature you control, and then return them to the battlefield under their owner's control. Conjurer's Closet is 5. This is 4. Conjurer's Closet is colorless. This has 1 white, so you need to be in white, obviously. Closet is an artifact. This is an enchantment, but Conjurer's Closet doesn't let you exile artifacts. However, Conjurer's Closet, the thing returns to play under your control. So there's tricks with Conjurer's Closet where you can exile a creature that would at end of turn normally leave your control and go back to somebody else. And in the case of Conjurer's Closet, it comes back under your control without the previous clause that would let the person get it back. So there are some tricks with Conjurer's Closet there that this can't do. However, on average, I think if you are playing a white deck that wants a Conjurer's Closet, Teleportation Circle is probably just a better Conjurer's Closet because, as good as Closet is, there's those occasions I've seen where a board wipe happens or something, and the person doesn't have any creatures in play, so their Conjurer's Closet doesn't do anything for that turn or whatever. With Teleportation Circle, worst case, you can blink one of your mana rocks, which, I guess technically you could have lost those too, but there are times where, hey, if nothing else, I have no creatures that are worth blinking. I'm just going to reset my Soul Ring or reset my Thran Dynamo or whatever and have that available for mana in case you need it at instant speed on someone else's turn. I think most of the time it's a slightly cheaper Conjurer's Closet with a little more upside. There's decks where that's not true, but I think it's a really solid card. Now, you don't, I believe, run Conjurer's Closet in Brago. Do you, Max, or do you?
I believe I do.
Okay. Would this be worth adding to your Brago deck at that point then, if Conjurer's Closet is good enough?
I'm going to try it as a replacement.
Okay.
Because it does hit extra things, but at the same time, in my mind, what I'm seeing this card doing for me is Brago isn't on the battlefield, but I have a tapped mana crypt or something.
Right.
That's been pinging me turn after turn, and I don't want to spend the 4 mana to, untap it during my upkeep, and this is what would probably do that for me.
Sure.
And there's some other cases with some other cards that maybe don't untap during my upkeep, but I don't know if I'm doing Brago things, I don't need one more Brago thing.
Right, yes.
I'm at that weird tipping point in that deck where I have to be so surgically precise on what gets swapped for what because of the balance of the deck. So yeah.
For sure.
If I do try it, it's going to replace Conjurer's Closet as is in the deck, but I don't know how long it'll last, just because Brago hits anything, Conjurer's Closet hits creatures, Venser hits anything. So
you have a lot of stuff already that blinks.
Permanence, yeah.
Okay, let's move on to blue. Max, what's the first thing in blue that you find interesting worth talking about here?
Demi-Lich? Did I pronounce that right?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, it's quadruple blue. For a creature skeleton wizard, it's a 4/3, but this spell costs blue less to cast for each instant and sorcery spell you've cast this turn. When Demi-Lich attacks, exile up to one target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, copy it, and you may cast the copy. And then you may cast Demi-Lich from your graveyard by exiling 4 instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard, in addition to paying its other costs. Normally, I would not be interested in this card at all, but I've been toying around with a Veyron deck list right now. The red-blue legend from the Strixhaven Commander decks.
Sure.
And I feel like this is, I get to cast that card that I exile, which triggers a bunch of Magecraft shenanigans from Strixhaven. So the fact that I think it's just more synergistic with what I'm trying to build in my head without going crazy because it's a combo deck, that's why I'm interested in this card.
I was thinking about it for Talran, because there's going to be enough times in that deck where, not even turn 10, sometimes on turn 5 or 6, I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to brainstorm, then I'm going to ponder, then I'm going to portent, and now this costs me 1.
Right.
Or maybe none if I have 4 spells in hand and I can do it, but okay, so I spend 2 on it, who cares? Then the next turn, I'm immediately going to be able to recast one of those things, and, I can bring it back from my graveyard late game if I need to. I haven't decided if I want to, but it's on my short list of things to at least try out.
I do like that it does not care what color instant or sorceries you've cast that turn, which is huge. You would think maybe it would be specific to only blue, or maybe blue-black or blue-red, because this guy does look kind of dead, so I would see this caring about Dimir stuff.
Yeah, I'll be curious if it's good enough even for Kess lists. Despite being 4 blue, those decks tend to run a lot of cantrips and stuff too, so this is probably a pretty easy way to just cast for free, or at least 1 blue on a Kess list as well. Yeah, very cool card. So the first one here that I kind of like and want to go into in blue is Wizard class. I talked about Paladin class. Wizard class is also 1 blue. The first blue mode, you have no maximum hand size. Something people always tend to like, I do as well, even if it isn't that necessary, I do. The second mode, 2 in a blue. When this class becomes level 2, you draw 2 cards. So this is the kind of thing, drop it on turn 1, ideally, and then later on at some point, turn 5 or 6 or something, when you just need some more gas, 3 mana, mana into it, draw your second, draw 2 cards to take it to level 2. Level 3 is going to be 5 mana, 4 and a blue. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1 counter on target creature you control. This isn't to say whenever you draw 1 or more cards, put a +1 counter on target creature you control. It's whenever you draw a card. So in the right deck that draws a lot of cards, you put a counter on a creature for your draw step, and then you cast that Brainstorm and put 3 counters on a creature, and then cast, whatever you're casting after it. Like, it's going to be very easy in some decks to, on a single turn, just put 8 or 10 counters on one creature. And that can happen every time you draw cards. So I think this is a really solid spell in the right deck that has 3 relevant modes that are relevant at almost any point in the game. Like, even the level 2 draw 2 cards, like, there's going to be points in the game on turn 10 or even 11 or something where you're like, oh, okay, well, 4 mana to draw 2 isn't ideal, but like, I'll just drop this and immediately roll it up and draw 2 cards. That's like better than not drawing cards. So I think this is just solid in a bunch of decks, and I have 1 or 2 that are very, very much pondering running it.
Yeah, this card is bonkers. I mean, it is one of the 3 classes that's going into Tuvasa.
Oh, nice.
Just because they're cheap, they will draw a card when I cast them, and they're at worst they're a mana sink if I have nothing better to do.
Yep.
Must do it as a sorcery. Answered my own question, audience. Look at that. I read the card. Okay, my next card is going to be Split the Party.
Oh,
nice. This is a 5 mana, 2 blue sorcery that says, choose target player, return half the creatures they control to their owner's hand, rounded up. We are always looking for other non-Cyclonic Rift type effects, and this is one of them. I mean, 5 mana sorcery isn't great, but there's a lot of, budget decks that will probably run this since Rift is $40-some.
Right.
So I just think it's a cool way to get another mass bounce into the hand of a player. I am wondering who chooses what creatures get returned. I guess that's my question.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it says it doesn't specify them, so that I would assume means you. It doesn't say they choose, so I think the default would be you pick.
Yeah, and it doesn't target, so yeah. We'll wait till the rules text comes out in a couple of days.
But yeah, it's always nice to have alternatives to having to use Rift, and this is a fairly solid one for sure. Did you have anything else in blue? For whatever reason, that was all that jumped. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in blue, but none of it felt kind of universally useful. A lot of it felt pretty niche. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is really solid, I think. If you're playing a mill deck, it's 1 blue. Each opponent exiles cards from top of their library until that player has exiled cards with a total mana value of 20 or more. So, I mean, again, if you're playing a mill deck, it doesn't risk. The problem with mill sometimes is you have to risk putting stuff in the graveyard player's library. This exile stuff. So you don't have that risk. So assuming you're not doing reanimation shenanigans at the same time, that I guess could be a downside there, but otherwise I would say it's generally an upside. There's some decks though, whether it's, like my Talrand deck, you might well go 40 cards deep on me if you're just hitting lands and things like 1-drop spells. Like, you could take a whole bunch of cards away from me for 3 mana. That's really, really good. And it hits every single person simultaneously too. So I think if you're playing mill, this is really solid. It's not anything that I'm going to run, but I think it's a decent card.
Yeah, I love this card. I won't run it personally, but I feel like if you're in a meta where you see like a lot of, low average CMC decks like your Talrand deck, Dana, are you running into a ton of landfall decks?
Sure, yeah.
Those decks tend to run 40 plus lands.
Or those Joyra's Eggs decks that are running, or Glissa Eggs decks that are running, a dozen or 15 different 0-drop artifacts and a bunch of 1-drops. You could take half their library away with this for 3 mana.
Yeah, I definitely think this is extremely meta-dependent, or you just need another way to win via mill.
Yep. So any final blue ones from you, Max?
Nope, we don't need to talk about the new cancel, so we can move on to black.
There's always a new cancel, isn't there?
Yep.
So how about black? What do you like in black here?
I don't know. I kind of like the Book of Vile Darkness. This is another legendary artifact. It's triple black. At the beginning of your end step, if you lost 2 or more life this turn, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, and then you can tap and exile it. And artifacts you control named Eye of Vecna and Hand of Vecna to create Vecna the legendary 8/8 black zombie god creature token with indestructible. It gains all triggered abilities of the exile cards. I feel like that Vecna deck is going to be very build around, like, you're specifically trying to do that,
yes.
And that's what I'm here for. Like, if that's your one goal is to assemble Vecna the black zombie god. I'm all for it. I'm going to see what you can do, and I want to see what you exile on the way there. So that's probably going to be some sort of, Demir deck, because it is caring about what gets exiled more than how you did it. So, I mean, that's where Tasha's Hideous Laughter probably comes into play here.
The question then becomes, yes, the problem with that is that kind of becomes Magical Christmas Land, right? To hit all those artifacts. Although you are in tutor colors. But the fact that you just make a zombie when you lose 2 or more life, there's plenty of decks where this is just going to basically be, hey, free zombies.
I mean, yeah, read the bones, make a zombie, pass the turn. Next turn, Night's Whisper, make a zombie, pass the turn.
I mean, cards like Keurig, where like you're just always going to be paying life because that's what Keurig does. Or the most recent Grievin Predator Captain, where, part of the abilities in that card are losing life. So this is just, that's a 2-color deck. Keurig is a 1-color deck. It's mono black. So the trip black, particularly in Keurig, isn't a big deal, and it's probably pretty castable in a 2-color deck in Grevin as well. This is just something you can drop and just make zombies for free for doing what you're already doing. The next one I kind of like here is Deadly Dispute. 1 in a black for an instant as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature. So we've gotten a few variants on this since Altar's Reap way back in the day. There was Costly Plunder. Altar's Reap was the same cost, and it was sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards, which was pretty solid. Then we got Costly Plunder, which was just strictly better because you could also hit artifacts. Then we got Village Rites, which was 1 mana, sacrifice a creature, so it was a strictly better Altar's Reap in that it was cheaper. Now we get Deadly Dispute that lets you hit artifact or creature and create a treasure token.
Oh, so it's like if Costly Plunder and Village Rites had a baby.
Right. Well, and I would say it's probably better than Village Rites, too. It's not like you're casting this on turn 1 or 2 ever. You're not like making a creature that you're immediately sacrificing on turn 1 or 2 for the most part. This is something you're probably never going to cast before turn 3 or 4 at the earliest. So yes, it costs 2 mana versus 1 from Village Rites, but it makes you that treasure token, functionally refunding that mana if you need it that turn anyway. So like, it's just going to cost 1 mana if you need it to. It also hits artifacts, and there's plenty of things that care about treasure, whether it's adding to your artifact count or giving you something to sacrifice a Corvald, maybe you're playing green in the doubling season in play or something. I think like this is a effect we've gotten a few different versions of in the last few years at Common, and this is maybe the best version of that, of which was already pretty good. So yeah, I like this one a lot.
Yeah, this is great.
What else do you have here, Max?
I'm going to go right down the list. I'm going to talk about Death Priest of Mike Mirkul. That's what
I think so, yeah.
2 black for a Tiefling Cleric. A Tiefling, I think, is a D&D creature type, right?
Yeah, I think they are like half demon or part devil, not demon. So I think
okay.
I believe in D&D, devils and demons are the inverse of what they are in Magic. So in Magic, devils are kind of like the mindless, chaotic imps, and demons are much more like cunning and manipulative. I think in D&D, it's the inverse. Devils are kind of the manipulators, and demons are kind of the dumb smashers. So I believe tieflings are like parts devil.
Gotcha. Tieflings have large horns that take any of a variety of shapes. Some have curling horns, other have blah, blah, blah. That's all I'm getting off of
the
thing I'm reading on Google, so we'll stop there. Okay, but this says skeletons, vampires, and zombies you control get +1/+1. Right there, it's another zombie lord.
Yeah.
Or vampire lord. Or skeleton lord, because there are some skeleton stuff specifically in this set.
Mm-hmm.
It also says, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 black skeleton creature token. So you can only do that once, but you can amass an army you're paying 1 mana for a 2/2, essentially.
Right, yeah.
Which is huge. On top of, if you run that Gisen Giralf zombie tribal deck, or that Grimgrin deck, this is just another lord for your zombies. Or you run either Draina, there's another vampire lord, this is such a utility card. I love it.
Yeah, real good. Gonna be enough for your Red Krav deck, or do you just have too many of these things already to let you make stuff when something dies?
I already have enough of them, and I have enough different of them where I don't think I make a lot of zombies except for Field of the Dead.
Okay.
And I don't make vampires, and I don't make skeletons. Now, if this is like angels or cats, all over that.
Sure. Okay, so the next one here I want to talk about is one more class. I think this is the last class that I'm liking. There might be one more, which is a Warlock class. Again, a single black. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. It's only your end step, not every end step, so that one isn't quite as impactful, but I mean, it's not nothing. 1 in a black, when this class becomes level 2, look at the top 3 cards of your library and put 1 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Putting stuff in your graveyard in some decks is not a downside, that's an upside. And at this point, you're 3 mana to put maybe the land into play you want to cast or the answer in play in your hand, and then put that big creature in your graveyard that you're going to revive anyway. That's not bad at all on some decks. And level 3 is 6 and a black, so 7 here. It's Wound Reflection. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses a life equal to the amount of life they've lost this turn. Well, it's just kind of a damage doubler on an enchantment that, you can drop it on turn 1, or you can drop it whenever, basically, for that 1 mana that you tend to have. Like, oh, well, I've done my thing this turn. I've cast these things. I've accomplished what I want to accomplish. I have 1 black mana left. I'll just drop this Warlock class. And whenever it's convenient, I will drop, cards off it and fill my graveyard, and then turn it into a Wound Reflection for 7 mana late game. It's just another one of those classes with a bunch of relevant modes at a lot of points in the game. It's easy to play, and also, if you drop this for 1 mana, I think this is true of a lot of these, and someone's like, I don't want to see this turn into that level 3, I'm going to remove it, you probably feel okay about that too. If someone wants to blow a removal spell on one of these class cards, particularly early on, you're okay with that. So this one I'm a fan of, and like I said, I like the mechanic. This is my favorite mechanic from the set by far, is the class cards.
Nice.
What else do you have here, Max?
I think that is I have covered every black card I wanted to talk about, since we're not touching legendaries this week.
All right. I will quick do one more Vorpal Sword I quite liked. Single black for equipment, and it says equipped creature gets +2/+0 and death touch. Costs 2 black to equip, and that's actually not that's not a terrible cost to cast it or to equip it if that's all it did. However, for 5 black, so 8 total, until end of turn, Vorpal Sword gains whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. I don't think you want to just jam this into a ton of decks, maybe, but if you're playing almost any of those rogue tribal decks that have black, or even ninja decks that have black, you have enough unblockable stuff that you can just drop this and kill people. That's just how it works sometimes. There's, if you're playing a fairy deck even, or like the most recent Alayla deck, that's in 3 colors, but it's a fairy deck. Everything has evasion in that deck, and you make fairies just for casting an artifact. So you drop this early on, get a free fairy out of the deal, equip it to something to give it death touch and +2/+0. That's pretty useful. And then later on in the game, when someone else doesn't have any flyers, spend your 8 mana and kill them. It's a cool card. I like it. So since you were out of stuff for black, Max, why don't you start us off with red? What do you like in red?
I mean, Chris isn't here. Do we have to talk about red?
He mentioned that too at the shop this week. I heard you guys are bad-mouthing red.
Jeez, he scared the crap out of me when he brought that up too, because he was all puffy-chested and angry. And he's like, I'm just kidding. So yes, I'm actually going to talk about Zariel, Archduke of Avernus. There we go. So this is the Planeswalker in red. It's 2 red for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker with 3 abilities. The +1 ability says creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. That's perfect for red. Mm-hmm. Its 0 ability says create a 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. That's kind of like a goblin ability, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And then the ultimate at -6 says you get an emblem with, at the end of first combat phase, on your turn, untap target creature you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Dana, a planeswalker that does additional combat steps is finally here. Nice. And I like that you could kind of spread that out. So you could attack with your big dragon, and maybe a couple other things, untap that big dragon, and then untap with the 3 other things you didn't attack with, because it just cares about the first combat step and what you untap. Right. So if you save stuff to aside, you essentially could get more bodies through on that second combat step. Yep. Yeah, having that on a Planeswalker is quite nice. And it's mono red too, so you can splash into a lot more decks than it would be if it was multicolors. Yeah, that's real good. And Wizards, just a side, I know nothing about art, but you really shouldn't have the art of the character cover the title of the card. Yes. Zorn, 2 in a red I quite like for a creature elemental. If you would create 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. So if you're just getting an extra treasure in any of those treasure decks, and our friend Mike, who has a treasure clue food deck, was so excited this week at the shop about how many more treasure toys he gets that are going to give him even more treasures. So he was pretty pumped about that, but I do think if you are playing one of those decks, that's getting even more free mana out of that's pretty good. Yeah. What else do you have here, Max? I think you had 1 more in red. I guess we're just going to go backwards through red. You find some prisoners, which is 1 in a red for an instant, and it's a modular card, so you choose 1. The first ability is break the chains, or break their chains, which is destroy target artifact. The second ability is the one I'm interested in, which says Interrogate Them. Exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. Choose one of them. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. You may spend mana as though it were any mana of color to cast it. So it's Red's Impulse Draw, but you're stealing your opponent's stuff. A little bit of an act of treason there.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get a land off it. It says play. It doesn't say cast. Right. Which I think is awesome. And it's an instant. So I think this will definitely see some play in EDH just because you can hit your opponent's lands. You can get that Divining Top off the top of their library. You can screw up their Enlightened Tutor, their Mystical Tutors, the creature we talked about up in white that does the Enlightened Tutor type effect. I think this is going to be a really cool card to see cast in red decks.
Yeah, very much so. So speaking of modular cards, I got one I'm going to mention here. You see a pair of goblins. 2 and a red for an instant. That's a big deal, it being an instant. And your 2 modes are Befriend Them, which is create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, or Charge Them. Creatures you control get +2/+0 till end of turn. So this is what's nice about this is if you're playing some kind of a go wide deck, whether it's just tokens in general or goblins, instant speed, create 2 1/1s is not terrible. And giving all of your creatures +2/+0 when they attack is pretty useful sometimes too. If it's early on in the game, you just need bodies, you make 2 1/1s before the end of the turn. Mana you're maybe saving for a counterspell or something, and if you don't need it or whatever, you just use it as a sink. Make 2 goblins, and move on. If it's turn 11 or 12 or something, and you've already gone wide and have a pretty big board state, and you want to try to punch through and kill somebody, swing out with those tokens or goblin tokens that you have or something, and then instant speed, give them all +2/+0, and you're going to sneak some wins that way as well. I think it's either mode are pretty good in a go wide deck, tokens or goblins, and I'm going to try it in my Adriana deck for sure. So I always like this kind of card that is generally useful in decks like this, and it's just uncommon. It's like a draft card, but it also is pretty playable in quite a few commander decks. So yeah. I like that one as well.
Oh, I can't believe I'm going to say this. I have more red cards I'd like to talk about.
Chris is going to be delighted when he hears that. What do you got?
I want to talk about a couple cards that deal with dragons. The first being Orb of the Dragon Kind.
Okay.
This is a artifact for 1 and a red, and it has 2 abilities. The first being 1 and tap to add 2 mana in any combination of colors, but you can only spend this mana to cast dragon spells or activate abilities of dragons. Scion, you need a mana to do his ability. There's a bunch of dragons that have already been printed that have activated abilities. This is just a cool little signet on an artifact, essentially. Its second ability is red and tap. Sacrifice Orb of the Dragon Kind. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal a dragon card from among them and put it into your hand and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. What a great way to look through the top 7 cards of your library trying to find a big 7/7 flyer that's going to beat face. And the fact that this is an artifact, as I'm reading the card, I kind of want to do like a Duretti Scrap Savant Dragon tribal deck. So you can recur all these artifacts while looking for dragons.
I like it. That would be interesting. Max, you're in a mad brewing mode for right now for some reason, and 2 of the decks are red.
I am, and they will never see paper. My second dragon type card is Dragon's Fire. It's 1 and a red for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may reveal a dragon card from your hand or choose a dragon you control. Dragon's Fire deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If you revealed a dragon card or chose a dragon as you cast the spell, the Dragon's Fire deals damage equal to the power of that card or creature instead. So it only hits creatures or planeswalkers, but the fact that if you have a bunch of dragons, you're turning a 2 mana instant from dealing 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker into 5, 6, 7, 11 based on, if you're running like the Dragon or something like that.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know if I have any particular decks for it that I want it myself, but this is one of those cards that I read it and I was like, yeah, I'm going to see this. People are going to play this for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's just for the flavor value.
Right, yeah, definitely. So Max, was there anything else in red?
No, so let's move on to the best color in Magic, green.
So, I talked about cards that feel like uncommons are made for draft that just wind up sometimes being great in Commander. Choose your weapon, 2 and a green for an instant. And it's like another one of those modular cards. You can use 2-weapon fighting, where you double target creature's power and toughness until end of turn, or archery, the spell deals 5 damage to target creature with flying. The archery mode, once in a while I might cast it. instant speed, doubling target creature's power and toughness. And it isn't yours either. It's just double a creature's power and toughness to end a turn. There's a whole bunch of different decks where that is super useful. You know, whether it's maybe your Dromoka deck, just to wind up dealing lethal to someone who's not ready for it, or my Kresh deck, where someone else's creature dying doubles Kresh's power, or I'm going to fling something and want to double it ahead of time. That's really good there as well. But like, how many times too do you see somebody like, I'm going to swing at you with this thing for, 9 damage, and they're like, fine, I'll take it because I'm still at, I'm at 16 right now and I'll be able to kill you next turn. You can jump in even and like, sorry, I'm going to double that creature's power and you die. The ability to hit other people's creatures, I think, is what makes this, what puts it over the top. It's a really solid card as is, I think, and I would probably at least have one deck that will run it. But the fact that you can do tricks like that with it makes it even better. This is a card I am definitely going to put in at least one deck, and I will probably buy an extra copy because I could see myself running it elsewhere down the road.
For sure. Yeah, I like it. It's similar to Berserk without the destroy clause.
Yep.
So you can't really use it as a removal spell, but you can use it as a player removal spell,
Absolutely.
Which is super great.
How about you, Max? What's your first green one you like here?
I'm going to talk about Druid class. So this is the green class for 1 and a green.
Mm-hmm.
Its first ability says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, gain a life. Cool. You can bump it up to level 2 for 2 and a green, and you may play an additional land on each of your turns. And level 3 cost 4 and a green, so 5 mana. When this class becomes level 3, target land you control becomes a creature with haste, and this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control, and it's still a land. This is going to go in a bunch of landfall decks.
Yeah.
Obviously. All the Tatiovas, anything like that. But again, for me, it's a 2-mana draw spell in Tuvasa with the ability to turn into an exploration, which gets me to get more cards out of my hand on my turn.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like this one, and it's as an uncommon, it's going to stay cheap as well. Because burgeoning and exploration are not. But this one will be.
No.
Yeah. So the next green one I want to just mention, there's not anything crazy to say about it, but that's Circle of Dreams Druid, trip green for an elf druid. It's a 2/1 and it just says tap, add green for each creature you control. So it's Gaia's Cradle on a creature. This is just going to never be a cheap card. I mean, I'm not sure it's going to be crazy expensive, but like, it's just going to always be a couple bucks. I would love to just jam it into my budget elf deck that I've got, but it's not going to make the cut. Probably because I think people are just going to play it in a ton of different places. But that's a really, really good card. So if you are not someone building on a budget or aren't afraid to spend the $10 or whatever it's going to wind up costing, yeah, really, really good. And it's going to go in a lot of places in addition to being a great card in an elf deck. What's next for you, Max?
So the next one I want to talk about is one I might not run, but it's very similar to a card I love, and that is Long Rest. This is X and triple green for a sorcery that says, return X target cards with different mana values from your graveyard to your hand. If 8 or more cards were returned to your hand this way, your life becomes equal to your starting life total, and then you exile Long Rest. So essentially, for 11 mana, you get up to 8 things back, and you go back to 40 life. I'm trying to compare this to Seasons Past, which is a sorcery from Shadows over Innistrad for 4 green. Return any number of cards with different mana values from your graveyard to your hand, but then you put Seasons Past on the bottom of your library. I was chatting with Raphael on Twitter about this, and I said, it's possible, it's definitely possible, that's 11 mana.
Right.
But you're also in the mana doubling colors and all the fun green stuff. But the most I think I've ever gotten back with Seasons Past is 6. So I think with Long Rest, your deck definitely has to be in that birthing pod type deck where you have X amount of 1-drops, X amount of 2-drops, and so on and so forth. And it's almost like this is going to be more of a combo piece than anything, in my opinion.
Yeah. I tend to agree, but I think it's a pretty good card.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's really it for me for green. Did you have anything else in green, Max?
Can't talk about that one this week. Oh, yeah, I would like to talk about the Ranger class.
Oh, yeah.
Again, it's a rare for 1 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 wolf creature token. You can level it to level 2 for 1 and a green. Whenever you attack, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. And for 3 and a green to bump it to level 3, you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. What big stompy green deck doesn't want that?
Right. Yeah, well, I'm curious where the price from this winds up, because I think it might play in that budget elf deck that I've got together.
Oh, for sure.
Always looking for ways to draw, and that's not real draw, but like it kind of is. Future Sight's a pretty good card in blue, and this is going to be that for creatures in green, so yeah, that's a real good card.
Otherwise, for green, I do kind of like You Happen on a Glade. This is a 2 and a green for an instant. It's a modular card. You can choose one. You can Journey On, which is search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them and put them in your hand, then shuffle. Or you can make Camp, which is return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So you get a regrowth, sort of a regrowth, or a not as good Cultivate / Kadama's Reach.
Yeah, so you have 2 worse versions of 2 spells that are both crazily heavily played. So you can just, pick which slightly worse version you want to run depending on what point in the game you're at.
Yeah, I appreciate that this is instant. So
Yep.
I could definitely see this, if you wanted to try swapping out Kadama's Reach for this and keeping Cultivate, doing this at the end of someone's turn when you have no lands in hand and maybe you're short that 1 and you don't want to risk drawing it or not drawing it, crack this and then you're set for the next 2 turns. You have 2 lands in your hand.
Well, and I've also hit the point sometimes with my Mina and Den deck where, Mina and Den give me an extra landfall trigger and, there's a bunch of things, whether it's Azusa, Lost But Seeking, or of course the Crufix or whatever, like the things that give me extra land drops as it is. And I hit the point sometimes where I have the ability to play extra lands more than I have lands in my hand. And Cultivate, in those cases, a lot of times actually, Cultivate just winds up being put 2 lands into play.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to wind up being, I think, in that deck is where I was considering it. It's going to wind up, for the most part, not really being a worse Cultivate. And it does give me the second mode on there. So that should do it for green, I think. And there's probably not much in the way of multicolored, but there's a few we can probably talk about here. The first one that jumps out at me is Fighter class. Once again, the classes are really kind of standing out. It's red and white, 2 mana. Mode 1 is really strong. When Fighter class ETB, search your library for an equipment card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle. That's almost always going to be worth casting or worth running in any red-white deck that has a handful of equipment in it. That's really, really good. Level 2 is 1 red-white, 3 total. Equip abilities is you activate costs 2 less to activate. That's going to make a bunch of things equipped for free and, sort of punch and face or whatever it is. It's still going to cost 1, but that still feels pretty good. That's a pretty good reduction. And the level 3 mode, which is 3 white-red, whenever a creature you control attacks, up to 1 target creature blocks at this combat if able. So that feels a little bit strange. Usually you don't want something to attack, to block your stuff, but just don't use it then. Like, I feel like spending 5 mana to get to level 2 and then just leaving it sit there, unless you're in a deck that wants that ability. But I would not feel bad in an equipment deck spending 2 on this, going to level 2, and then just never taking it past that point. Reducing equipment cost by 2 on an enchantment that's much harder to remove than like a Pure Steel Paladin or an Arden, it seems really, really good, and it's going to get you the equipment on the first mode. I think that's a really, really good card.
Yeah, this is bonkers. I think I saw Joey Schultz tweet about how, wow, this is another set where red-white is all about equipment.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Max? What else do you like here among the multicolored?
I love, and geez, here I go talking about another red card. The Sorcerer class. Blue and a red for a class. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. You can level it up for a red and a blue. Creatures you control have tap, add blue or red. Spend this mana only to cast instant or sorcery spells, or to gain a class level. And then you can level it up to level 3 for 3 blue-red for whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of instant and sorcery spells you've cast this turn. So it's essentially putting Gutter Snipe on enchantment. Mm-hmm. So that's super cool. Again, like I said, I'm brewing a red-blue spellcaster deck. This just fits kind of right in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
I also feel though, when you if all you do on your turn is put it to level 3, I feel like your next turn is going to be the turn you're either going to win or die.
Yes.
Because the entire table is going to be like, wait a minute.
Very much.
You didn't do anything but do that? Okay.
Yep. That's really all I had for multicolor, just because a lot of these are legends, and then we'll try to talk about those if we do legends. So
I have a question for you though, Dana.
Yeah.
The Rogue class, specifically in your Vela deck, because the first 2 abilities I think are perfect. The first ability is whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library face down. You may look at it for as long as it remains exiled. That part is fine. The second level though gives creatures you control menace. And then the third ability lets you do stuff with the exiled spells because you can cast them as if you had mana of any color.
So my Vela deck, because of the way it works with Vela, most of my stuff most of the time has Menace anyway, or not Menace,
True.
has Evasion anyway. I thought about it, and I was like, the Menace is going to feel wasted a bunch of times.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, and I actually quite like this card. It's just, I think the biggest problem is a lot of those Dimir decks, whether it's ninjas or rogues or my Vela deck or whatever, and there's a lot of flying in those colors as well. I think those decks tend to have a good bit of evasion already, so I think that's lost a little bit. But I like the card. I think it's a cool design. It's just, I wish it was in maybe different colors that didn't always have good evasion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
So we popped onto artifacts here before we wrap things up.
Let's do it.
Eye of Vecna. First of all, has fantastic, disturbing art.
Yeah.
It's a 2-mana artifact, legendary artifact, mind you. When Eye of Vecna enters the battlefield, you draw a card and lose 2 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card and lose 2 life. So it's also one of the things you need to have in the sequence to make Vecna into a creature. So it's part of that series. However, I'm trying to decide if I want to run it in my Recce deck because it's legendary. So functionally, it's a 2-mana draw 2. That's really good most of the time. It adds to the legendary count, which does matter sometimes for some things. And then there's plenty of times or not plenty, but like it does happen where I feel like I'm running out of gas. And okay, I'm just going to pay 2 during my upkeep and who cares if I lose 2 life and draw a couple cards just so I can draw a card just so I can be in a position to hit that creature I needed to start the chain going. 2-mana draw 2, lose 2 life feels really solid in that deck, and I think I'm going to try to find a slot for it. And maybe in my mono white deck too, that always needs card draw. I might try it there.
Yeah, I really like this card. I'm trying to find a spot for it in Brago just because blinking it gets me a card. I lose 2 life, but if I have something like Cloud Blazer out, it's just going to negate the life loss, stuff like that. So I think this is an awesome, cheap artifact that I think we'll see in a lot of decks.
Were there any more here that you liked among the artifacts? There's not a ton of artifacts in the set.
No, and I think the reason I don't like them is because all of them involve rolling a die,
yeah.
which is another huge component of this set, which we haven't talked on.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, I mean, in my opinion, I get it, it's a D&D set, but I don't really want people rolling dice all over my board state. Like, I get the occasional coin flip and stuff, but
sure.
I feel like if you try to build this roll a die deck, it's just gonna be dirtily.
Yeah, and I also don't like not knowing what my cards do. I do understand that some people like the fun of the randomness or something. That's fine. I'm just not one of them. I like to put a card in a deck and for the most part know what it's going to do. And the unpredictability, I think, is something I personally don't love. But I appreciate mechanics that I think other people like. Like if it's not for me, it's not for me. It's not a big deal. Not everything needs to be for me. But I think there's a lot of people that will like that because it feels like D&D. And that's great.
Right. You know, we also didn't discuss the dungeon cards, which is fine by me. It's just another cool thing they're doing for this set.
Yeah. They feel a bit like the learn mechanic, where it's probably more something for limited than it is for... I mean, learn definitely was, because you couldn't use it. But the dungeon you can use, but I don't know if they're strong enough necessarily to use just casually in Commander, outside of a deck that really is going hard in that mechanic.
Yeah, 100% agree. And the fact that you can only be in one at a time, I think, and I might be wrong, I didn't listen to the video and I haven't read the rules, but it sounds like you can only be in one at a time.
I believe so, yes. So how about these? Were any of these lands useful? There's a sequence of lands that can turn into creatures that ETB tapped, unless it's like a fast land situation where they're in your battlefield early. Are any of those things you liked, Max? None of them jumped out at me, but... No,
I don't like these type of lands to begin with. I don't really run a lot of creature lands. I think I run Celestial Colonnade and Brago, and that's about it. I get now wanting to run Mutavault for the Angel token thingy, but...
Sure.
Yeah, none of these really do it for me. The Temple of the Dragon Queen is kind of cool. It's just, it enters the battlefield, reveal a dragon card from your hand, or you may. If you do, it enters untapped, and then you choose a color, and then add 1 mana of the chosen color. So it's a really hard jump, like a lot of rings to do what you want to do.
To just get your pick of a basic land, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one I liked here that I think we'll see some play is Treasure Vault.
Yep.
Taps for colorless, or you can spend XX and sack it and create X treasure tokens. So if you spend 2, you make 1. If you spend 4, you make 2. Spend 8, you make 4, whatever. It's also an artifact land, which is relevant in plenty of decks. I'll be curious to see how often this shows up, because I feel like I'm going to see it a lot.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of it. I think this will be another reason we'll see a small spike on Crucible Worlds again,
Mm-hmm.
and anything that returns target artifact from your graveyard. Like, I plan on putting one in Sai, just because it is an artifact.
Sure. Yeah, I'm playing Vela.
Brago might get one just because I can Sun Titan it back.
Mhm.
And the fact that there's so many things that make treasures in this set, and there were so many things that make treasures in Modern Horizons 2. Cool, I'm going to use 8 treasures to make 4 treasures, and then just kind of, I'm sure there's a way you can loop it, because there are cards that double the amount of mana treasures produce.
Sure.
That we've seen in this set or Modern Horizons, so it's broken. It is stupid broken.
Yeah, very cool. Well, and it's not sorcery speed, too. It's one of those things where, like, I kept 4 mana up because I was going to maybe use this cryptic command, and nobody did anything. I'm like, well, I could blow the cryptic to draw and bounce the thing, or I could just make 2 treasures, and maybe I'll just do that with my mana as mana sink. It's also one more thing to put underneath a prototype portal.
Oh, gross, Dana, no.
Because, like, in my Vela deck, I have Prototype Portal, and, 3 months ago, I had 3 artifact lands in there. I had the 2 from Mirrodin Block, or 3 from Mirrodin Block, really. The 2 colored ones on the Darksteel Citadel.
Mm-hmm.
Then we got Cycle of Artifact Lands in Modern Horizons 2, which gave me a dual land, and there was one more artifact, the one that had modular on it. So that took me to 5. Treasure Vault takes me to 6. Like, in addition to any of these, the Soul Ring that's fine to put underneath there, or Mox Opal, which I have in that deck, because it's an artifact synergy deck, that's a lot of really good targets in that deck to put things underneath Prototype Portal to just tap and make artifact lands whenever I want to. So, yeah, this is cool in a whole bunch of ways. I just hope it isn't $15 card or something. I guess I haven't even looked at the pre-order price on it, but
I don't want to.
So I think that is going to wrap up us looking at the non-legendary creatures from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. I think next week we will take a look at the ones that are legendary and that can be your commander and see what we like from there. Any final thoughts here on this, Max?
This set is super cool. Like I said earlier in the show, I think they did an extremely well done job of melding D&D with Magic to where it doesn't feel like it's too much of one or the other. That's kind of what I was worried about coming into this. I think some of the mechanics, the dice rolling, the venture into the dungeon stuff isn't for me, but flavor-wise is spot on. I'll be the first to admit we were all wrong with the party mechanics.
Yes.
Thinking that was going to come back. I guess that's a Zendikar thing, not a D&D thing. Or maybe it was just a bait and switch.
Sure,
But overall, I think it's a cool set. There are definitely more cards that we'll talk about next week that I'm interested in than this week, but I kind of feel that way about almost all Magic sets. The Legends tend to excite me more than the non-Legends.
I tend to agree. And I agree with your thoughts on the set as well. I think this has been a fun set to read about, even if I wasn't getting a bunch of cards. And that's I think, a mission accomplished if they've made a set entertaining if you're kind of on the outside. And weirdly enough, I have been in this case because it's just not a ton of cards I wanted to run here. But it was still fun. I didn't feel like it didn't have that vibe from, Core 2015 or something where when the set was done, I'm like, well, there's 3 cards I want and the rest are not that interesting. This was very much a set where even though there weren't a ton of cards I wanted, it was still really cool to read about, and I enjoyed the spoilers from it a lot. That's good.
Yeah.
So that is going to wrap up this episode of Commander Central. We will be back next week taking a look at the Legends. Until then, I'm Dana. You can find me on the Twitter words at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. And my cat is going crazy in the background. Until next week, I am Dana.
And I'm Max.